Every minute, a truckload of plastic is dumped into the oceans, and most of it will outlive every human alive today. This is not a future problem. It is happening right now. Beneath the surface of our daily comfort lies a growing crisis. Plastic pollution is quietly reshaping the planet, and most people don't even notice it in their everyday lives. But the evidence is everywhere once you start looking. Beaches covered in debris, rivers carrying floating waste into the sea, animals tangled in discarded packaging, and microscopic plastic particles entering the food chain. This is not just environmental damage, it is systemic overload, a byproduct of convenience that has spiraled out of control. Plastic was once celebrated as a miracle material, cheap, durable, and endlessly versatile. It transformed industries and modern lifestyles. But what made it useful also made it dangerous. Because plastic does not truly disappear. It only breaks into smaller and smaller pieces until it becomes invisible, but never gone. These fragments are known as microplastics, and they are now found in water, soil, and even air, meaning every breath and every meal may carry traces of it. The scale of this issue is difficult to comprehend because it is not confined to one country or one ocean. It is a global system failure. From cities to remote islands, no place is untouched. Even the deepest parts of the ocean are no longer clean. And this raises a critical question. How did something so useful become so harmful? The answer lies in how we produce, consume, and discard plastic. We've built a world dependent on a material designed to last forever. But we use it for things meant to last minutes. This mismatch is at the core of the crisis. Single-use culture accelerated the problem beyond control. Items designed for one moment now persist for centuries, and the waste keeps accumulating faster than nature can handle it. Recycling was supposed to solve this issue, but it has not been enough, because not all plastic can be effectively recycled, and much of it still ends up in landfills or nature. Meanwhile, production continues to increase every year, driven by packaging, consumer goods, and global demand. This creates a constant cycle of creation and disposal, a cycle that the environment cannot keep up with, and the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Wildlife is increasingly affected by ingestion and entanglement. Ecosystems are being disrupted at every level, and human health is now part of the concern as well, because what enters nature eventually returns to us. This crisis is no longer distant or abstract. It is embedded in everyday life, from the products we buy to the waste we generate. And yet most of it feels invisible in the moment. That invisibility is part of the danger, because what we don't see, we rarely act on. But the planet is already showing signs of strain, and those signs are growing louder each year. The question is no longer whether plastic pollution exists, but how far it has already spread, and what we are still willing to ignore, because ignoring it does not stop it. It only allows it to grow further, and eventually, it reaches everything, including us. To understand the crisis, we have to understand how it became normal. Plastic didn't take over the world overnight. It entered slowly, through convenience and necessity. At first, it solved real problems in packaging and preservation. Food stayed fresh longer, products became cheaper to transport, and everyday life became easier in countless ways. But convenience always comes with hidden costs. And in this case, the cost was delayed waste, because plastic is designed to last far beyond its usefulness. That mismatch created the foundation of today's pollution crisis. Over time, industries began to rely heavily on plastic packaging, not because it was the best option for the planet, but because it was the cheapest and most efficient. This economic advantage made it difficult to replace. And so plastic became the default material. Bottles, bags, wrappers, containers all became disposable. This created the culture of use and throw away, a mindset that spread globally. And once it became normal, it stopped feeling harmful. Human behavior adapts quickly to convenience, even when the long-term consequences are severe. The more plastic we used, the more waste we generated. And the more waste we generated, the more invisible it became. Out of sight, out of mind became part of daily life. Trash disappeared from homes and reappeared elsewhere, often far away from where it was produced. This separation created a false sense of cleanliness. But the waste never disappeared. It simply moved into landfills, rivers, and oceans. Meanwhile, production kept increasing to meet demand. Global supply chains accelerated plastic dependency. From food industries to fashion packaging, even essential goods became wrapped in layers of plastic because it was cheap, durable, and easy to mass produce. This efficiency masked its long-term environmental impact. At the same time, consumer culture evolved rapidly. People began buying more, replacing more, and discarding faster. Short product life cycles became the norm, and packaging waste increased alongside consumption. The system reinforced itself at every level. Businesses supplied plastic because consumers accepted it. Consumers accepted it because alternatives were limited. And alternatives stayed limited because plastic dominated the market. This loop made change extremely difficult. Even when awareness about pollution began to grow, recycling was introduced as a solution, but it created its own limitations. Because not all plastics are economically recyclable, and recycling systems vary widely across countries, much of the collected waste still ends up discarded or downcycled into lower quality materials. Meanwhile, new plastic production continues at massive scale, which means recycling only slows the problem. It doesn't stop it. The result is a growing gap between waste produced and waste managed. That gap is what fuels pollution in natural environments, especially in oceans where cleanup is nearly impossible at scale. And once plastic enters marine ecosystems, it spreads quickly, carried by currents across entire continents, breaking down into microplastics over time, becoming part of the natural cycle in a dangerous way. This is how a convenience material turned into a global burden, not through a single mistake, but through decades of normalized behavior. And a system built without an exit plan? The most dangerous part of plastic pollution is not always what we can see. It is what we cannot see that causes the deepest harm. Large pieces of plastic are only the beginning of the problem. Over time, they break down into smaller fragments. These fragments become microplastics, and microplastics spread almost everywhere on Earth. In oceans, they are consumed by fish and marine animals. Mistaken for food, they enter fragile ecosystems. And once inside a food chain, they do not leave easily. Small organisms eat them first. Then larger animals consume those organisms. And step by step, plastic moves upward through the ecosystem until it reaches the food humans depend on. This means the pollution cycle eventually circles back to us. Even remote marine areas are no longer untouched. Scientists have found microplastics in deep-sea trenches, places once believed to be completely isolated. This shows how far plastic has already traveled. On land, the impact is equally serious. Plastic waste affects soil quality and plant growth. It disrupts natural decomposition processes and reduces the health of agricultural ecosystems. Animals on land also suffer from plastic ingestion. Mistaking waste for food leads to internal injuries and starvation. This creates silent suffering that often goes unseen, because much of it happens in natural or remote environments. Another major issue is chemical leakage. Plastic can release harmful compounds over time, especially when exposed to heat, sunlight, or pressure. These chemicals enter water and soil systems and slowly affect biological health at multiple levels. The damage is not always immediate or visible. It builds gradually over time, making it harder to connect cause and effect. Air pollution is also part of the problem. Tiny plastic particles can become airborne, carried by wind across cities and continents, meaning plastic is now part of the atmosphere itself. Rain has even been found to contain microplastic traces. This shows how deeply embedded the issue has become. Ecosystems are not designed to process synthetic materials. Nature recycles organic matter efficiently, but plastic does not follow natural cycles. It resists decomposition on meaningful timescales, so it accumulates instead of disappearing, creating long-term pressure on environmental systems. Biodiversity is also affected. As habitats become polluted, species struggle to survive. Some populations decline rapidly due to contamination. Others adapt in ways that disrupt ecological balance. Even coral reefs are affected by plastic pollution, becoming more vulnerable to disease and bleaching. The ocean, once a symbol of abundance, is under strain. and its ability to sustain life is weakening in some regions. This is not just an environmental issue, it is a systemic one, because every part of nature is interconnected. Damage in one area spreads to others until the entire system begins to feel unstable. And plastic acts as a persistent stress factor in that system, constant, accumulating, and difficult to remove. Even cleanup efforts struggle to keep pace because the source of the problem is still active, and without reducing production, the cycle continues, expanding silently across the planet until it becomes impossible to ignore. The impact of plastic pollution does not stop at nature. It reaches humans too, because humans are not separate from the environment, but part of it. Microplastics have now been detected in drinking water, in bottled water, in table salt, and even in the air we breathe. This means exposure is no longer occasional. It is constant. Scientists are still studying the long-term effects on human health. But early findings raise serious concerns because these particles can carry chemicals into the body and may interact with biological systems in unknown ways. The uncertainty itself is part of the risk. We are already consuming materials we never agreed to ingest without fully understanding the consequences. Healthcare systems may eventually feel the indirect burden as environmental exposure translates into health challenges. But plastic pollution is not only a health issue, it is also an economic one. Governments spend billions managing waste each year, collecting, transporting, and disposing of plastic debris. Yet the volume keeps increasing faster than infrastructure can handle. Coastal regions are especially affected. Tourism industries suffer when beaches are polluted. Fishing industries lose productivity due to contaminated waters. And cleanup efforts require constant funding. This creates an ongoing financial strain. Businesses also face pressure to adapt packaging systems. Some invest in alternatives, but costs can be higher. This slows widespread change across markets because economic systems often prioritize short-term efficiency over long-term sustainability. Another challenge is global inequality in waste management. Some countries have advanced recycling systems, while others struggle with basic waste infrastructure. As a result, plastic waste often flows from stronger economies to weaker systems, creating environmental injustice. The burden is not shared equally, even though consumption is global. This imbalance highlights a deeper responsibility gap. Those who produce the most waste are not always those who suffer the consequences. Meanwhile, individual responsibility is often overemphasized, while systemic production continues largely unchanged. This creates confusion about where real solutions should begin. The truth is, both levels matter. Individual behavior influences demand, but industrial systems determine supply, and supply drives the scale of the problem. Without changes in production, individual efforts alone are limited. But without individual awareness, systemic pressure never builds. So responsibility exists on multiple layers. Governments, industries, and individuals all play a role. Policy changes can reduce single-use plastics, innovation can create sustainable alternatives, and consumer choices can shift market demand. But coordination between all three is essential, because no single group can solve the problem alone. Another important factor is education. Awareness influences behavior more than punishment or restriction. When people understand consequences, choices begin to shift naturally. But awareness must be consistent and widespread, not limited to environmental discussions or crises, because plastic is embedded in everyday life, and solving the problem requires everyday awareness, not just emergency responses. This is where real change begins to take shape. After understanding the scale of the crisis, the question becomes simple, but powerful. What can we actually do about it? The answer begins with rethinking everyday habits, because the smallest choices, repeated over time, create the biggest impact. One of the most effective steps is reducing single-use plastics. Items like bags, bottles, and straws may seem small, but they represent a massive portion of global waste. Replacing them with reusable alternatives significantly reduces pollution. Another important step is mindful consumption. Buying only what is needed reduces packaging waste automatically, and choosing products with minimal or recyclable packaging helps shift demand. Recycling still plays a role, even if it is not a complete solution. Proper sorting and disposal improve recycling efficiency and prevent more waste from entering natural environments. But real change goes beyond personal habits. It requires innovation at the industrial level. Companies are now exploring biodegradable materials and redesigning packaging systems to reduce environmental impact. Some are investing in circular economy models, where materials are reused instead of discarded. These systems aim to eliminate the concept of waste entirely. Governments also play a critical role through policies that restrict unnecessary plastic use and encourage sustainable alternatives. When regulations align with environmental goals, change accelerates. Education remains one of the strongest tools for long-term impact, because awareness shapes behavior more than pressure alone. Teaching younger generations builds a foundation for lasting change. Community action also makes a difference. Local cleanup efforts restore environments directly, while also strengthening collective responsibility. Social movements can push industries to adopt greener practices because public demand influences corporate behavior. Change often begins when people refuse to accept the status quo. Even small shifts in behavior can spread quickly through society. As habits become visible, they inspire others to follow. This creates a ripple effect of positive action. Another key idea is accountability, asking where products come from and where they go after use. This awareness alone changes consumption patterns. Technology also offers new possibilities. Innovations in material science are creating safer alternatives to plastic and improving waste management systems globally. But technology must be supported by responsible usage. Otherwise, even new solutions can become new problems. The future of the planet depends on balance between convenience and responsibility, between progress and preservation, and between consumption and conservation. The plastic crisis is not irreversible, but it requires immediate and sustained action, not just from a few, but from many. Every reused item reduces future waste. Every avoided purchase reduces demand. And every informed decision builds momentum for change. The goal is not perfection, but progress. Because progress compounds over time, and collective progress reshapes systems. If the problem was built over decades, the solution will also take time. But it must start now. The future is still being written, and human choices determine its direction. Plastic does not have to define that future. Responsibility gives us the power to rewrite the story. And that story begins with what we choose today.